Jack Monroe had been a salvage trader for 15 years. He had worked on ships that smelled like rust and fuel. He had eaten bad food in cheap stations across the outer territories. He had learned to spot value where others saw garbage. That skill had kept him alive and put credits in his account. Not many credits, but enough. When the Galactic Commerce Authority announced an estate auction on Kellis Station, Jack booked passage immediately. Estate auctions meant dead owners and forgotten cargo. They meant ships that families did not want and governments could not sell. They meant opportunity for someone willing to take risks. Kellis Station floated in neutral space between three major territories. It was old and gray and filled with traders from every corner of the galaxy. Jack checked into a small room near the docking ring and slept for 6 hours before the auction began. The auction hall was enormous. Hundreds of seats faced a central platform where holographic displays showed each item for sale. Jack found a spot in the back row and watched the other bidders arrive. The Velthari came first. They were tall beings with skin like polished crystal that reflected light in strange patterns. Their species had dominated galactic politics for 3,000 years. They controlled trade routes and set prices and decided which civilizations would rise and which would fall. The Velthari delegation took the front row as if they owned it. Nobody challenged them. The Krath arrived next. They were insectoid creatures with hard shells and multiple limbs that clicked and scraped when they moved. Their compound eyes saw in spectrums that humans could not imagine. The Krath were warriors and merchants who respected only strength and profit. They filled a section near the left side of the hall. Other species filtered in over the next hour. There were the gray-skinned Mortith who rarely spoke. There were the aquatic Solani in their mobile water tanks. There were traders and collectors and thieves from dozens of worlds. And in the back row, there was one human. Humans were not important in galactic politics. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 200 years ago. Compared to species that had sailed between stars for millennia, humanity was young and small and easy to ignore. Jack was used to being overlooked. Sometimes that was an advantage. The auction began with cargo containers and scrap metal. Jack watched the prices rise and fall as different factions competed. He was not interested in cargo. He had come for ships. The first vessels were transport shuttles with dead engines and cracked hulls. They sold for low prices to Krath merchants, who would strip them for parts. Then came a mining vessel with a contaminated reactor. It sold to a Mortith buyer who probably had ways to clean it that Jack did not want to know about. Lot 47 appeared on the holographic display and Jack leaned forward in his seat. The image showed a ship unlike anything he had seen before. It was large, maybe 300 meters long, with a design that did not match any known species. The hull was dark and smooth, with lines that curved in ways that seemed almost organic. Dust and debris covered most of the surface, but Jack could see something underneath. Something that looked intentional and precise. The auctioneer, a thin Velthari with a bored expression, read the listing aloud. Unidentified vessel. Class unknown. Origin unknown. Non-functional. No power signature detected. Minimum bid set at 1,000 credits. The Velthari delegation laughed. One of them made a comment in their language that Jack did not understand, but the tone was clear. The ship was worthless. A relic from some dead civilization that nobody remembered. The Krath clicked their mandibles in agreement. Their representative did not even raise a bidding paddle. Jack raised his hand. 3,000 credits. The auctioneer looked surprised to see a human bidding. He asked if there were other offers. There were none. The gavel came down, and Lot 47 belonged to Jack Monroe. He found Lisa Vance waiting outside the auction hall. Lisa was his business partner, and the person who handled the parts of the job that Jack was bad at. She was good with numbers and contracts and knowing when someone was trying to cheat them. She had dark hair that she kept short and eyes that missed nothing. "You spent 3,000 credits on a dead ship," she said. Her voice was flat, but Jack knew her well enough to hear the question underneath. Jack shrugged. He told her that something about the ship felt different. He could not explain it better than that. Lisa sighed, but she did not argue. She had learned to trust his instincts over the years. They had made money more often than they had lost it. She followed him to the impound dock, where Lot 47 waited. The ship was even larger in person. It sat in a pressurized bay with cables and supports holding it in place. The hull was dark gray and covered in fine dust that had accumulated over centuries or maybe longer. Jack walked around the vessel slowly and studied its shape. There were no visible weapons, no obvious engines, no markings or symbols that he recognized. Lisa accessed the station's records on her datapad. According to the files, the ship had been found drifting in deep space 40 years ago by a Velthari survey team. They had tried to board it, but every hatch was sealed. They had tried to scan it, but the hull blocked all sensors. They had tried to cut through the metal, but their tools made no mark. Eventually, they gave up and towed it to Kellis Station, where it had sat in storage ever since. Jack found what looked like an entry hatch near the front of the ship. There was a small panel beside it with a smooth surface. He reached out and pressed his palm against it. The reaction was immediate. Light spread from beneath his hand and traveled across the hull in branching patterns like veins carrying blood. The dust fell away as the ship began to vibrate with a low hum that Jack felt in his chest. The hatch slid open without a sound. Lisa stepped back in shock. She asked what he had done. Jack did not know. He had simply touched it. They stood at the threshold and looked inside. The interior was dark, but small lights were flickering to life along the walls and ceiling. The air that came from inside was clean and fresh, as if the ship had been breathing all along and just waiting for someone to wake it up. Jack stepped through the hatch. Lisa hesitated for a moment, and then followed. The corridor inside was smooth and curved like the inside of a shell. The walls glowed with soft blue light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Jack walked forward, and the ship responded to his presence. Doors opened ahead of him. Screens activated as he passed. Systems that had been silent for ages began to hum and whisper. They reached a central chamber that Jack assumed was the bridge. There was a single chair facing a wide curved display. The chair looked designed for a human body. The controls looked designed for human hands. Lisa checked her scanner and reported what she found. The power readings were impossible. The energy signatures did not match any known technology. The ship was not just functional, it was more advanced than anything in the current galactic registry. Jack sat in the chair, and the display came alive. Symbols appeared that he did not recognize but somehow understood. The ship was old, older than the Velthari civilization, older than any species currently traveling the stars, and it had been waiting for him. Jack and Lisa spent 3 days exploring the ship before they called for help. Every room they entered came alive at their presence. Every system activated when they approached. The vessel was massive inside, far larger than its exterior suggested, with chambers and corridors that seemed to go on forever. Lisa contacted 3 people she trusted. Ben Carter was a former military engineer who had served on human warships before leaving to work in the private sector. He was tall and quiet and knew more about alien technology than anyone Jack had ever met. Katie Morgan was a pilot who had flown everything from cargo haulers to racing ships. She had fast hands and faster instincts. Sam Ortiz was a communications specialist with a gift for languages. He could learn to speak basic phrases in a new tongue within hours and read written text within days. They arrived on Kellis Station within a week and boarded the ship together. Ben started with the engineering sections. He found power systems that generated energy from principles he did not understand. The reactors produced no heat and no radiation. They simply worked, converting something into power through methods that human science could not explain. Ben spent hours staring at the machinery with a mixture of confusion and wonder on his face. Katie explored the navigation systems. The ship had star charts that covered the entire galaxy in detail that current maps could not match. There were regions marked that no modern species had ever explored. There were routes through space that avoided every known danger. Katie realized that whoever had built this ship had traveled everywhere and mapped everything. Sam focused on the language. Every screen displayed text and symbols that looked like flowing water frozen in place. The characters curved and connected in patterns that seemed almost musical. Sam recorded everything and began the slow process of finding meaning in the shapes. Jack sat in the command chair and let the ship speak to him. He did not understand how, but information flowed into his mind when he touched the controls. Images and concepts appeared in his thoughts like memories he had never made. The ship was teaching him, On the 8th day, Sam made his breakthrough. He gathered everyone on the bridge and explained what he had found. The ship was called the Pathfinder. It had been built by a species that called themselves the Architects. They had been the first intelligent beings to develop technology in this galaxy. They had risen to power millions of years ago when most current species were still single cells floating in primitive oceans. The Architects had built everything. The network of relay stations that allowed faster-than-light communication across the galaxy had been their creation. The jump points that ships used to travel between star systems had been their construction. The fundamental infrastructure that every spacefaring civilization depended upon had come from the Architects, but the Architects had vanished. 2 million years ago, they had disappeared without explanation. They left behind their technology but no trace of themselves. Every species that came after them had used their tools without understanding how they worked. The Velthari had built their empire on Architect foundations. The Kroth had expanded using Architect jump points. Nobody knew who the Architects were or where they had gone. Until now, Sam continued reading from the records. The Architects had known they were leaving. They had prepared for their departure over thousands of years. And they had chosen successors. The Architects had studied every emerging species in the galaxy. They had watched evolution unfold on countless worlds. They had analyzed intelligence and creativity and adaptability across millions of years. And they had found one species that matched their own patterns. One species that thought the way they thought and dreamed the way they dreamed. Humans. The Pathfinder had been designed specifically for human minds. Its systems were keyed to human neural patterns. Its interfaces were shaped for human hands. Its language was structured for human cognition. The ship had waited in the darkness of space for 2 million years for humanity to evolve and reach the stars and find it. Lisa asked the obvious question: why humans? There were older species. There were smarter species. There were species that had been traveling through space, while humans were still living in caves. Sam checked the records again. The answer was complicated, but he tried to explain. The Architects valued certain traits above raw intelligence or technological advancement. They valued curiosity. They valued the drive to explore and understand. They valued cooperation and the ability to work with others even when it was difficult. They valued the willingness to help strangers and build connections across differences. According to their analysis, humans possessed these traits in greater measure than any other species they had observed. Humans were not the strongest or the oldest, but they were the most likely to use power responsibly. They were the most likely to share knowledge rather than hoard it. They were the most likely to lift others up rather than push them down. The Architects had bet the future of their legacy on humanity. Ben called everyone to the engineering section. He had discovered something important. The Pathfinder was not just a ship. It was a key. The Architects had hidden caches of technology across the galaxy, stations and vaults and storage facilities filled with knowledge and tools that could transform civilizations. These caches had been sealed and protected for 2 million years. They could only be opened by vessels carrying the Architect recognition codes. The Pathfinder carried those codes. More importantly, the caches could only be activated by beings with the right neural patterns, human neural patterns. Ben pulled up a map on the main display. Hundreds of points of light appeared across the galaxy. Each one represented an Architect cache waiting to be found. Some were small, containing specialized tools or limited databases. Others were enormous, holding technology that could reshape entire sectors of space. The largest cache was located in a region called the Verath Expanse. Current galactic maps marked that area as unstable and dangerous. Ships that entered rarely returned. The Velthari had declared it off-limits centuries ago. Jack studied the map and understood. The Velthari had known about the cache. They had been hiding it. They could not access it themselves, but they did not want anyone else to find it either. Katie ran calculations on the navigation system. The Pathfinder could reach the Verath Expanse in 6 days, using routes that no modern ship could follow. The Architect technology made current faster than light drives look primitive by comparison. Sam found more records about what the caches contained. Medical technology that could cure any disease. Energy systems that could power entire planets without fuel. Manufacturing methods that could build anything from raw atoms. Knowledge accumulated over millions of years by a species that had mastered the galaxy, all of it waiting for humans to claim. Jack looked at his crew. They were 4 humans and 1 ship against a galaxy that had ignored their species for 2 centuries. The Velthari would not let this stand. The Krath would want to take what they could. Every power in the galaxy would move against them once word spread. Lisa said what everyone was thinking. They needed to move fast. They needed to decide what to do with what they had found. Jack already knew. This was not something that belonged to one crew or one company. This belonged to all of humanity. And humanity needed to know what was coming. He began composing a message to send to Earth. The message reached Earth in 4 hours. Jack had used the Pathfinder's communication systems, which operated on frequencies that human technology could barely detect. The signal was strong and clear, and impossible to intercept. Within a day, the human government had responded. Within a week, the entire galaxy knew. Jack was not sure how the information leaked. Maybe a station worker on Kellis had talked. Maybe someone had intercepted a transmission. Maybe the Velthari had spies in places he did not expect. It did not matter. What mattered was that every major power in the galaxy was now aware that a human had activated an architect vessel. The Velthari arrived first. Ambassador Veloth came with a delegation of 12 officials and a security detail of 40 soldiers. His crystalline skin shifted colors as he spoke. Blues and greens that Jack had learned indicated concern beneath a surface of calm authority. Veloth requested a meeting aboard Kellis Station in neutral territory. He made it sound like a polite invitation. The warships that had appeared at the edge of the system suggested otherwise. Jack agreed to meet. He brought Lisa and left Ben, Katie, and Sam aboard the Pathfinder, with instructions to leave immediately if anything went wrong. The meeting took place in a conference room overlooking the station's main docking bay. Veloth sat across from Jack, with his officials arranged behind him like a wall of glittering stone. Lisa stood at Jack's shoulder and recorded everything on her datapad. Veloth spoke in the Galactic Common Tongue with perfect pronunciation. He explained that the Velthari Consortium had protected galactic stability for 3,000 years. They had maintained peace between species and ensured fair trade across sectors. They had studied architect ruins carefully and responsibly. They understood the dangers of technology that was too advanced for current civilizations to handle. He suggested that the Pathfinder represented such a danger. Uncontrolled access to architect technology could destabilize entire regions. Wars could erupt as species competed for power. Civilizations could collapse under the weight of change they were not prepared for. The consortium offered to take custody of the vessel. They would study it safely and share any benefits with the galactic community in due time. In exchange, Jack would receive compensation. Significant compensation. Enough credits to buy his own planet if he wished. Jack listened carefully and then asked a question. He asked why the Velthari had never been able to activate the ship themselves. Veloth's colors shifted to darker shades. He did not answer directly. He said that the architects had been careless with their designs. They had created systems that responded to random patterns rather than intentional control. The fact that a human had triggered activation was an accident of biology, not a sign of special status. Jack nodded slowly. He said he understood the consortium's concerns. He said he would consider their offer. He said he needed time to think. Veloth agreed to wait, but his tone made clear that patience had limits. The Krath arrived the next day. Their ships were smaller than the Velthari warships, but there were more of them. Dozens of vessels spread across the system in formations designed to intercept anyone trying to leave. The Krath did not request a meeting. They sent a message instead. The message was simple. The Krath Collective valued strength and directness. They did not play political games like the Velthari. They wanted the Pathfinder, and they were willing to pay for it. If Jack refused to sell, they would take it by force. If he tried to run, they would hunt him down. These were facts, not threats. Jack did not respond to the Krath message. He knew that any response would be seen as weakness or provocation. Silence was the only option that kept possibilities open. The Orion Syndicate made contact through back channels. They were a loose alliance of trading guilds and corporate interests that operated across multiple species. They did not have military power like the Velthari or the Krath, but they had something equally dangerous. They had money and connections, and the ability to make things happen quietly. A representative named Voss reached out to Lisa through encrypted communications. Voss offered a partnership rather than a purchase. The syndicate would provide protection, resources, and access to markets across the galaxy. In exchange, they wanted exclusive rights to any technology recovered from the architect caches. They would handle distribution and profit sharing. Jack would become wealthy beyond imagination. Lisa brought the offer to Jack. She laid out the numbers and the possibilities. The syndicate deal was actually reasonable by galactic standards. They were offering more than any human had ever been offered for anything. Jack refused. Lisa asked him to explain his thinking. They were surrounded by hostile fleets with no backup and no allies. Earth was weeks away, and human military forces were tiny compared to what the Velthari or Krath could deploy. Taking a deal might be the only way to survive. Jack walked to the viewport of the station and looked out at the stars. He told Lisa what he had learned from the Pathfinder's records. He told her about the architects and their reasons for choosing humanity. He told her about the caches scattered across the galaxy and what they contained. Then he told her what he had decided. The architects had not left their legacy to one person, or one company, or one government. They had left it to humanity as a whole. Every human being had equal claim to what the Pathfinder could unlock. Jack had no right to sell that inheritance to aliens who wanted to control it or hide it away. Lisa pointed out that noble intentions would not stop the Velthari warships from blowing them apart. Jack smiled. He told her he had a plan. The next morning, Jack broadcast a message on every frequency the Pathfinder could reach. The signal went to Kellis Station, and to the alien fleets, and to every human vessel and colony within range. It went to Earth, and to the outer territories, and to places where humans had never been heard before. The message contained the map. Jack released the locations of every architect cache in the galaxy. He gave the coordinates and the access protocols and everything the Pathfinder's records had revealed. He told humanity what was waiting for them and invited them to claim it. The response was immediate. Human ships began launching from every port and station. Traders and explorers and military vessels broke from their normal routes and set course for the nearest caches. The human government on Earth mobilized their fleet. Colony worlds armed their defense forces. Humanity was moving. All at once. In every direction. The Velthari could not stop them all. The Krath could not intercept every ship. The Syndicate could not buy what was being given away for free. Jack had turned a confrontation into a race. And for the first time in galactic history, humans had a head start. Ambassador Veloth requested an emergency meeting. His colors had shifted to deep reds that Jack did not need a translator to understand. The consortium was furious. They accused Jack of reckless endangerment and violation of galactic protocols. They threatened sanctions against Earth and exclusion from trade networks. Jack listened and then made a counteroffer. He told Veloth that humanity was willing to share whatever they found. The medical technology, the energy systems, the knowledge, all of it could benefit every species in the galaxy, not just humans, but humanity would not be controlled. They would not be bought or threatened or pushed aside. They had waited 200 years for a seat at the table. The architects had given them that seat, and they intended to keep it. Veloth stared at Jack for a long moment. Then he left without another word. The race had begun. The Pathfinder left Kellis Station under cover of chaos. Dozens of ships were moving through the system as news of the map spread. Human vessels pushed past alien patrols. Velthari warships tried to establish blockades, but there were too many targets and not enough ships to stop them all. The Krath scattered their forces to intercept as many humans as possible, but they could not be everywhere at once. Katie plotted a course through the confusion and found gaps in the alien formations. The Pathfinder's engines were faster than anything else in the system, and its sensors could detect threats before they became dangerous. They slipped away from Kellis while the galaxy scrambled to respond. Jack set their destination for the Vareth Expanse. According to the Pathfinder's records, the largest architect cache was located there. A station the size of a small moon holding technology that could change everything. The Velthari had hidden its existence for centuries. Now, Jack intended to find it. The journey took 6 days through regions of space that current maps called empty. The Pathfinder followed routes that had been traveled 2 million years ago, and then forgotten. They passed through systems that had never been surveyed by modern civilizations. They saw stars and planets that no living being had witnessed since the architects departed. Ben spent the journey studying the ship's engineering database. The more he learned, the more amazed he became. Architect technology operated on principles that human science had not even theorized. Their power systems drew energy from the fabric of space itself. Their materials were engineered at the atomic level with precision that current manufacturing could not approach. Their computers processed information through methods that Ben could only describe as thinking. Sam continued translating the ship's records. He found histories of species that had risen and fallen long before the current galactic powers existed. He found descriptions of worlds that had been paradise and worlds that had been hell. He found the story of the architects themselves, told in their own words across millions of years. They had not always been wise. In their early centuries, they had made mistakes. They had fought wars among themselves and damaged worlds that took generations to heal. They had built weapons that could shatter moons and viruses that could end entire species. They had learned hard lessons about the cost of power without responsibility. But they had survived. They had grown. They had become something greater than they had started. In the end, they had reached a point where physical existence no longer satisfied them. They had discovered ways to transform themselves into beings of pure thought. They had moved beyond matter and energy into something else entirely. And before they left, they had looked back at the galaxy they were leaving behind. They had seen young species struggling to find their way. They had seen potential wasted and opportunities missed. They had wanted to help, but they had also known that help given too freely would be help that failed. Species needed to grow on their own. They needed to earn their achievements. So the architects had created a test. They had hidden their technology and set conditions for its release. They had chosen a successor species and given them the key. They had trusted that when the time came, that species would make the right choices. Now the time had come. The Varath expanse appeared on the navigation display as a field of warnings and danger markers. Current galactic maps showed gravitational anomalies and radiation storms and debris fields that would tear normal ships apart. Katie studied the data and found something interesting. The dangers were fake. The anomalies were projections. The radiation was artificial. Someone had created an elaborate illusion to keep ships away from this region. The Pathfinder passed through the false barriers without damage. Beyond them lay clear space and a single massive structure orbiting a dim red star. The station was enormous. Its surface stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction, covered in towers and domes and structures that served purposes Jack could not guess. Lights glowed in patterns across the exterior, shifting and changing as if the station was alive and watching. As the Pathfinder approached, the station responded. Signals passed between ship and structure in frequencies that human equipment could not detect. Recognition protocols confirmed the vessel's identity. Authorization codes validated the crew's neural patterns. A section of the station's surface opened like a flower, revealing its center. A docking bay large enough to hold 100 ships waited inside. Katie guided the Pathfinder through the opening and set down on a platform that materialized beneath them. The bay doors closed and atmosphere flooded the space. Lights activated throughout the surrounding structure, spreading outward from their position like ripples in a pond. The crew gathered at the main hatch and looked at each other. This was the moment that would define everything that followed. Jack opened the door. The interior of the station was a cathedral of light and sound. Corridors branched in every direction, each one leading to chambers filled with technology and knowledge. Screens displayed information in the architect language. Machines hummed with power that had waited millions of years to be used. Sam found a central directory and began navigating through its contents. The station contained everything. Medical facilities with equipment that could diagnose and treat any condition. Manufacturing centers that could build anything from raw materials. libraries holding the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had spanned the galaxy. Ben discovered the power systems and nearly wept. Clean energy. Unlimited. Sustainable. Enough to power every world in the galaxy forever without pollution or waste. The technology was complex, but it could be understood. It could be replicated. It could be shared. Lisa found the real treasure. In a secured section of the station, behind doors that required human authorization to open, she discovered the truth about the architect's departure. They had not simply evolved and left. They had made a choice. They had seen the future of the galaxy spread before them like a map of possibilities. They had seen paths that led to destruction and paths that led to growth. They had calculated which species was most likely to guide the galaxy toward the better futures. The calculations had been overwhelming. The architects had modeled billions of scenarios across millions of years. They had tested every variable and considered every factor. And at the end of their analysis, one species had emerged with the highest probability of success. Humans were not chosen because they were the best. They were chosen because they had the best chance of becoming better. They learned from mistakes. They adapted to change. They cared about strangers. They built bridges instead of walls. The architects had bet everything on humanity's potential to grow. Jack stood in the center of the station and felt the weight of that bet. 2 million years of planning and preparation had led to this moment. An ancient civilization had trusted that humans would make the right choices when the time came. He thought about the Velthari and their desire to control. He thought about the Krath and their belief in strength alone. He thought about every species that had built power by pushing others down. Then he thought about what humans could be, what they had always tried to be, even when they failed. He made his decision. The station had communication systems that could reach every corner of the galaxy. Jack activated them and began recording a message. He would tell the galaxy what he had found. He would offer to share it with everyone. He would prove that the architects had been right to believe in humanity. Katie interrupted him with urgent news. Sensors showed multiple fleets converging on the Vareth expanse. The Velthari had found them. The Krath were coming. The secret was out, and the galaxy was racing to respond. They had hours at most before the first ships arrived. Jack finished his message and prepared to send it. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would know the truth, and humanity would have a chance to prove what they could become. The fleets arrived faster than expected. Velthari warships emerged from hyperspace in precise formations, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of the red star. Krath vessels followed in swarms, dozens of smaller ships moving like predators circling prey. Behind them came ships from other species, powers that had stayed quiet until now but wanted their share of whatever was about to happen. Jack watched the sensor display and counted over 300 vessels taking position around the station. More were arriving every minute. The combined firepower surrounding them could crack planets. Lisa asked what they were going to do. Their single ship against a fleet was not a battle. It was suicide. Jack smiled and said they were going to do something the galaxy had never seen before. He activated the station's external communication array and broadcast his message to every ship in the system. The recording played across hundreds of bridges and command centers. Velthari admirals heard a human voice explaining what the architects had left behind. Krath commanders learned about technology that could transform their civilization. Every captain and crew member received the same information at the same time. Jack had not just recorded a message. He had recorded an offer. Humanity would share everything. The medical technology, the energy systems, the manufacturing methods, the knowledge. All of it would be available to every species that wanted it. No conditions, no payments, no demands. In exchange, Jack asked for one thing: recognition. Humanity wanted to be treated as equals in galactic society. They wanted their worlds protected under international law. They wanted a voice in decisions that affected everyone. They wanted to stop being ignored. The response was immediate and chaotic. Some captains began arguing with their commanders. Why attack a species that was offering to share something so valuable? What was the point of war when cooperation was on the table? The Krath Collective prided itself on practical thinking. Destroying the humans meant destroying access to technology that could benefit everyone. The Velthari fleet held position, but their formation wavered. Ambassador Veloth was aboard the flagship and demanding answers. His consortium had controlled galactic politics by controlling access to architect technology. Now the humans were giving that technology away for free. The foundation of Velthari power was crumbling. Human ships began arriving at the edge of the system. They had followed the Pathfinder's course and found their way through the false barriers. Dozens of vessels at first, then hundreds. Military cruisers from Earth, trading ships from the colonies, exploration vessels from the outer territories. Humanity was gathering. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move could start a war that would burn across the galaxy. One right move could change everything. Jack received a communication request from a Velthari ship. Not the flagship. A smaller vessel at the edge of their formation. The captain identified herself as Sarath, a scientific advisor attached to the fleet. She asked permission to come aboard the station alone and unarmed. Lisa warned against it. The Velthari could not be trusted. This could be a trap. Jack agreed to the meeting. Sarath arrived an hour later in a shuttle that docked at a secondary bay. She was younger than most Velthari officials Jack had seen. Her crystalline skin showing patterns of light blue and silver that he had learned indicated curiosity and openness. She walked through the station's corridors with wonder on her face. They met in one of the library chambers where screens displayed knowledge accumulated over millions of years. Sarath stood before a display showing medical techniques, and her colors shifted to deep greens that Jack recognized as hope. She told Jack that she had studied architect ruins her entire life. She had dreamed of unlocking their secrets. The consortium had always told her that the technology was too dangerous, too powerful, too unpredictable. Now she understood the truth. The consortium had been afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of a galaxy where their power meant nothing. Sarath asked if the offer was real. Would humans truly share what they had found? Jack said yes. He explained what he had learned about the architects and their reasons for choosing humanity. He told her about responsibility and cooperation, and the belief that the galaxy could be better than it was. He said that humans could not change things alone. They needed partners. They needed species willing to work together toward something greater. Sarath was quiet for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would reshape galactic history. She returned to her shuttle and contacted the Velthari scientific community. Hundreds of researchers and scholars who had spent their careers studying architect technology received her message. She told them what she had seen and what the humans were offering. She asked them to consider what that offer could mean. The response split the Velthari consortium down the middle. The political leadership wanted to maintain control. The scientific community wanted access to knowledge that had been denied to them for generations. Arguments erupted across their fleet as factions formed and alliances shifted. The Krath Collective made their own calculation. They had come to take by force what could now be obtained through cooperation. Fighting served no purpose when the prize was being freely given. Their ships stood down, and their commander sent a message acknowledging the human offer. Other species followed. One by one, the fleets that had come to threaten began sending messages of acceptance instead. The galaxy had expected humans to hoard power like every other species had done. The decision to share instead had broken every expectation. 3 months later, representatives from across the galaxy gathered at the neutral world of Thesson Prime. It was the largest diplomatic assembly in recorded history. Over 100 species sent delegations. The agenda was simple: creating a new framework for galactic cooperation with humanity as a founding member. Jack attended as the official representative of Earth. He stood before the assembly and spoke in the galactic common tongue that Sam had taught him during the journey. He did not give a grand speech about human superiority or architect destiny. He talked about the future. The technology they had found could cure diseases that had plagued species for millennia. It could provide clean energy to worlds that had never known abundance. It could build bridges between civilizations that had never trusted each other. But technology alone meant nothing. What mattered was how they chose to use it. Humans had made many mistakes throughout their history. They had fought wars and caused suffering and failed to live up to their ideals. But they had also learned. They had grown. They had never stopped trying to be better. That was what the architects had seen in them. Not perfection. Potential. The Treaty of Thesson Prime was signed by every major power in the galaxy. It established a new council, where all species had equal voice. It created frameworks for sharing technology and resolving disputes. It recognized humanity as full partners in galactic civilization. Jack returned to the Pathfinder after the ceremony. His crew was waiting on the bridge where everything had started. Ben had already mapped a dozen more architect caches that needed exploration. Katie had plotted courses to places no human had ever been. Sam had translated records, hinting at secrets that could take lifetimes to understand. Lisa had organized the paperwork for their next expedition. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders waiting to be found. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and the adventure was just beginning. Jack settled into the command chair and looked out at the infinite darkness beyond the viewport. Somewhere out there, the architects were watching. He hoped they were pleased with what they saw. He gave Katie the order to launch, and the Pathfinder leaped forward into the unknown. The future was waiting.